I'm stuck in a situation right now, and honestly, I have no clue how to handle it. Let me explain from the start. 3 years ago, my next-door neighbor, Robert as we call him, told us that his 13-year-old son had gone missing. He went straight to the police about it. The case was on the news. It was all over the place. My wife and I felt completely heartbroken and always offered our help in any way possible. As time went by with no trace of their son, we figured they eventually accepted it and realized the worst had likely happened. My wife and I never once had the courage to ask if his body was ever found. From time to time, Robert and his wife would invite us over for barbecues during the warmer seasons. We could tell neither of them were ever quite the same since their boy disappeared. Robert's wife, Elena, was noticeably quieter and more withdrawn, while Robert just seemed more uneasy and jumpy, which was understandable to a degree. Jump ahead a couple of years to just last week. Robert approached me while I was bringing the garbage out and asked if he could borrow a shovel. Without even questioning it, I hurried to grab my best shovel and handed it to him. He thanked me, mentioned he just had some work to do in his backyard, and promised to return it by the next day. Then he went straight back into his yard. When I got inside, I happened to look from one of my upstairs windows that gave me a clear view into Robert's backyard, and I saw him digging a very large hole in the ground. He looked like he was struggling with it. After all, he's 54 years old. I thought I'd grab my spare shovel and give him a hand. But when I walked into his backyard and called out his name, he quickly stopped, dropped my shovel, and rushed toward me saying, No, it's fine, Andrew. I've got this. Please, just go." I replied, "What's wrong with you? It's really not a big deal." Mainly because I was baffled by how strangely he reacted. He shot back, "I won't let you use that shovel in my backyard." Then he pointed at the gate like I was some sort of animal. I was so stunned by his behavior that I just turned around and left without another word. From upstairs, I kept watching him through the window. He continued digging for another 30 minutes or so. When he finally stopped, he started glancing around at the neighboring houses, looking up as if to make sure no one was spying on him. And before I could duck out of sight, his eyes caught me watching from my window. All I could do then was slowly walk away like nothing happened. Something about this was off, and I needed to figure it out. Every now and then, I kept checking his yard, but he wasn't digging anymore. I assumed he realized I was keeping an eye on him and would probably wait until nightfall, and that assumption turned out to be correct. At 1:20 in the morning, I heard the sound of a shovel striking dirt outside. It was way too dark to see clearly from my window, so I crept outside quietly and peeked over the fence into his yard. I could clearly see him digging under the moonlight. When he eventually went back inside his house, I took the chance to sneak into his yard and peer into the hole he'd been working on. The moonlight revealed part of a black garbage bag sticking out from the soil at the bottom. I glanced at his back door, then back at the hole. I repeated this 3 more times, debating if I should check what was inside the bag. In the end, I sprinted back into my own yard, and it was the right move because just seconds later, he returned outside. But this time he wasn't digging. Instead, he vanished toward the other side of his house and never came back. I slipped back into my home and carefully got into bed, doing my best not to disturb my wife. The next morning, the very first thing I did was look out my window again and saw that the hole in Robert's yard had been completely filled in. I also noticed his SUV was now parked on the street instead of his driveway. I don't know exactly what went on the rest of that night, but it unsettles me to think the hole might have held his son's body. For all I know, he dug it up just to move whatever was buried there and drove it off somewhere else. Of course, this is just speculation. Call me insane if you want. I haven't breathed a word of this to anyone, not even to my wife, and truthfully, I have no idea what to do. Robert still hasn't returned my shovel, and I'm not going to ask him for it. In fact, he's been actively avoiding me since that night. And something really disturbing happened just yesterday. By coincidence, I happened to glance across to Robert's house and saw him standing at one of his windows, staring right into mine. As soon as he noticed me, he shut his blinds immediately, and this happened in broad daylight. I don't know what steps to take next, but I'm honestly scared out of my mind. At the moment I'm writing this, it's been 3 weeks since it happened. I've pretty much disliked nearly every one of my neighbors. I just finished college and I'm living by myself now, but it definitely comes with its downsides. I ended up in a rundown neighborhood, the only spot where I could actually afford a house, so having decent neighbors isn't something I can count on. The people on one side blast their music constantly, while the ones on the other side are by far the strangest people I've ever encountered. It's just 2 women who live in the house next door. One of them is in her 70s, unfriendly, and honestly seems out of touch with reality. The other is a bit younger and appears to have very severe mental disabilities. I can't say I know what their exact connection to each other is. More often than not, I'd sit out on my porch and glance over to see the older woman restraining the younger one. During what looked like some kind of breakdown, she'd keep her arms folded tight, rocking back and forth quickly while yelling and making strange noises. Sometimes she'd even turn toward me, pointing her finger while mumbling things to the older lady. It's honestly pretty disturbing. Anyway, one night seemed no different from usual. I needed to go to bed early because I had work the following morning, but my next-door neighbors were making an unusual amount of racket. I could hear the disturbed woman screaming and throwing tantrums as the older woman shouted in frustration. It dragged on for an hour and I couldn't put up with it anymore. I stormed over to their place and pounded on the door. The older woman opened it and greeted me with a bitter, "What the hell do you want?" I asked as calmly as I could if they could tone it down. She raised her brows and lowered her head, clearly irritated at my request. Just then, the younger woman came rushing into the living room, shouting, "How dare you?" again and again. The older woman held her back as she tried to come at me, then slammed the door in my face. I couldn't wrap my head around what just happened, but I knew I didn't accomplish what I went there for. I walked back to bed feeling defeated. At least things next door had finally gone quiet. I was able to finally get some rest. Well, I woke up feeling like the night passed way too quickly. I looked at the clock and saw it was only 3:30 in the morning. I dropped my head back on the pillow in relief, but soon I thought I heard a sound coming from downstairs. I got out of bed and went to my door just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. When I didn't hear anything else, I returned to bed. Then I woke up again in the darkness of my room. Only 15 minutes had gone by since I'd fallen back asleep. I couldn't figure out what had woken me this time, and then I heard it again. My chest tightened as I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table to use as a light. But once I had it in hand, I didn't dare switch it on. I scanned my dark room in silence, searching every shadow for a figure. I looked into every corner, and even though it was nearly pitch black, I knew no one was standing there. That's when I heard the sound clearly. I turned toward the edge of my bed and spotted a black, shadow-like circle right at the wooden frame. When my phone's glow revealed what it was, I saw the face of the deranged woman from next door staring at me. She screamed like an absolute lunatic, shrieking as if light itself was burning her. I let out a scream too. I yelled as I scrambled clumsily to the door, tripping halfway while glancing back to see her chasing me. I slammed my bedroom door shut and bolted down the stairs, locking the door that led upstairs. I dialed the police while she hammered on the door, screaming incoherently. When the officers arrived, I told them the woman lived next door and that she was mentally unstable. The older woman came out after hearing all the noise and begged the cops to let her go, but they told her they had to take the younger woman in for at least the night. One officer asked if I wanted to press charges, and as he did, the older woman shot me the most hateful, evil glare imaginable. I decided not to press charges, but her glare didn't waver. The cops escorted the younger woman away as the older one kept staring me down, walking back into her house. About 10 minutes later, I saw her get into her car and drive off. Both of them still live next door to this day. I'm honestly thinking about moving because the creepy old woman makes it clear she hates me. And I've realized that the mentally disturbed woman isn't just terrifying, she's also dangerous. I've lived in 3 different houses throughout my life. 2 of them were with my family, and now I'm in my current house on my own. We stayed in the first house for the first 14 years of my life, and then moved into the second house for the following 6 years before I eventually left for the place I live in now. This particular experience took place in my first home when I was 14, just a few months before my family moved out of that house. I don't recall my family ever being especially close, or even that friendly with any of the neighbors. In fact, there were 2 boys who lived next door with their dad, and my brother and I had only spoken to them maybe once or twice in our entire lives. Odd as that sounds, we still knew both of their names, which were Richard and Carlos. One afternoon, my brother and I, with him being 4 years younger than me, were outside shooting hoops in the driveway. That's when one of the boys from next door, Carlos, came outside and walked over to us, starting up a conversation. I couldn't tell you the exact words we exchanged, but the first thing he asked was whether it was true that we were moving away. Since I was the older brother, I did most of the talking, maybe even all of it. Carlos seemed to be around my age, though I never asked him directly how old he was. By the time the conversation ended, he invited me to join him and his brother the next day to shoot BB guns by the river in the woods down the road. I agreed since it was the weekend, and I didn't really have anything else planned anyway. My little brother suddenly asked if he could come along too, not just assuming he was automatically invited. Carlos said sure and then headed back to his house. Late the following day, about an hour before dusk, Richard and Carlos rang our doorbell. We answered quickly because our parents had no idea we were planning to go shoot BB guns. Walking down the street with Carlos and Richard wearing full camo gear and lugging a duffel bag full of BB guns felt really strange. The level of seriousness they seemed to have about the whole thing felt off to me and my brother, and a couple of times we exchanged looks trying not to laugh at how ridiculous it seemed. We reached the woods barely saying a word to each other on the way there. I could already tell these were kids who didn't talk much. Maybe that explained why we had never officially interacted with them until then. Carlos set the duffel bag on the ground and unzipped it, while Richard snapped a thick branch off a tree and hurled it into the river. My brother and I looked at each other again, but this time we weren't laughing. Carlos pulled out a pair of guns and handed them to us to hold. That's when Carlos dropped the shocking news and told us the guns were actually real. Richard grabbed one from the bag that was already loaded and began firing at trees across the river. When it hit me that he wasn't joking about the guns being real, I felt a mix of anger and confusion. I snatched the gun from my brother's hands and shoved both of ours back into the bag. I told them we weren't okay with this and needed to leave. Richard stopped firing and they both stared at us with half-angry looks on their faces. As we walked away, one of them shouted a curse word at us. I had always suspected those two weren't good kids, but this pretty much confirmed it for me. I told my brother not to talk to them anymore for the rest of the time we lived there. At dinner that night, we told our parents those kids were really strange, but we didn't say anything about the guns. That night, I woke up to a cold breeze hitting me in the face. My bedroom window was wide open. I felt something hard press against the back of my head as I looked out the window and then heard someone whisper, "Shh." For some reason, I didn't scream or flinch. I just stayed calm. It didn't take long for me to understand exactly what was happening. I recognized Carlos's voice whispering right behind my head. He told me that if I ever said anything to anyone, especially to his dad, about the guns or that night, he would come back and kill me and my whole family. In a shaky whisper, I replied, "Okay." He pressed the gun against my head one more time before climbing back out my window. Every night for the next several months, I'd catch either Carlos or Richard staring from a certain window of their house into either my room or my brother's. As our moving date got closer, their behavior just grew even stranger. About a week before we moved, at around 1:30 in the morning, a rock hit my window. I opened it to see Carlos pointing a pistol straight up at me, and feeling like I was about to be killed, I threw myself to the floor. Just as they both started cracking up laughing, I heard one of them call me a fucking Kevin. Twice more that same week, they harassed either me or my brother in some way. In the end, I couldn't imagine a better time for us to get out of there. After all these years, neither my brother nor I have ever told anyone about those boys or their threats. All I know is they were real trouble, and we were lucky we moved away when we did.